Uh, is he gone?
Think so?
Yes, the boss is out. Let's talk about stuff he doesn't like. Strategy time. Today, the music arcade.
Woo!
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the music arcade. My name is Eddie, and I am usually not your main host, but as always, I do have with me
Ranakel, that's me. Hi, hello, how you doing?
Oh boy. And today is a rare Galen-less episode. So the boss is out and we're talking about stuff the boss doesn't want to talk about.
Yeah, I think he's going at his nation's gender reveal party or something. Instruction unclear.
Something red and blue color, something fire.
Yeah.
In any case, we're talking about strategy games, specifically those of the real-time kind.
Yes.
Galen tends to not be a huge fan of those, but we do have a lot to talk about.
Honestly, I don't remember him having expressed any antagonistic view towards them.
Hi, biker dude. I hear you. Yeah, I don't know if he straight up dislikes the genre or if he doesn't just feel like playing it. Maybe it just doesn't catch his attention very well.
And in either case, that's okay. To establish that clearly.
I mean, we have done an episode based entirely on a game that I don't play, which was the 2 live concerts for Final Fantasy XIV, so people don't liking games is fine.
So you don't like FF14 or you just haven't played? See, that's the problem with words and expressing them correctly. You gotta be precise, man.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Language Arcade podcast.
Your words, not mine.
Let's get started to our discussion, and your first one up.
Alright, so to begin with something that's emblematic of the genre and representative of what it stands for as a whole, I decided to go with Kessen 2, which is a console-only PS2 real-time strategy game based on the Romance of the Three Kingdoms story and made by Koei, the Dynasty Warriors guys.
I mean, aren't all RTS games like that?
No, they're not.
Oh, well, I have a very wrong impression of the genre then.
Indeed. But this one stands out, well, it primarily stands out by its completely over-the-top cutscenes and weird story beats and very liberal reinterpretation of the kind of myths it's based on. But it has behind that real-time strategy-like gameplay where instead of moving individual units, you're basically ordering battalions to follow certain roads, and when they encounter enemies, they can ambush them. Your characters that are in the battalions can use abilities ranging from shouting really loudly to inspire your people, all the way to levitating 50 meters above ground and throwing giant fireballs in a line. So, historical stuff.
Realism.
Exactly. Now, in case that wasn't obvious enough, I'm being very cheeky there. And that's important because of the relationship between the game's tone and its music. So, in another move that's Galen has his back turned, let's do things he wouldn't necessarily approve of, Dynasty Warriors is known for its very rock tracks. It has a very distinct kind of soundtrack. You can listen to any track in isolation pretty much and say to yourself, yep, there's the guitar I recognize. That's a Tennessee Warriors track. So, what did you think of the electric guitars in these tracks?
Sorry, that another biker dude. I felt like this piece was a bit cheesier, let's say, than most RTS soundtracks I've heard in the past. It's very pompous, let's say. Reminds me a lot of anime soundtracks.
I wouldn't go to anime length, but I would agree about the pomp and the fact that it aims to essentially imprint an epic feeling. I think that's the main words that stands out from that. There's a conflict not between like 20 dudes, but each battalion can rank up to 12,000, 13,000 people, and you can control like 15 at once to have over 100,000 people on the battlefield duking it out. And it's that kind of scale, that kind of grandeur that this kind of the tracks that are in the game aim to evoke, along with keeping it with the setting, of course, which is ancient China.
Honestly, those numbers are kind of impressive for a console strategy game, because even on PC it tends to cap at 200 or 300 units.
Don't worry, they weren't all visible at the same time, far from it. They cheated a lot, but the numbers are there. Basically, each encounter is its own mini battlefield in isolation, and you control and you give orders to your entire set of battalions, but once you zoom in on one of them, you control one of the generals there directly to do things like hit people with your stick, or the aforementioned fireball.
Because gaming.
Oh, historical game. Thank you very much.
Yeah, the soundtrack, going back to the music, it definitely brings up that sense of scale, and the sound itself, mainly the melody, at times does remind me specifically of Chinese culture and Chinese music, despite being a symphonic soundtrack.
Yeah.
Definitely does a good job at showcasing what the game is about to me.
Good. Well then, shall we move on to actually more traditional kind of real-time strategy game?
You say traditional, but it actually, I would say the next game is a bit of a middle ground. We're talking about Rise of Nations next, and Rise of Nations actually has you creating platoons of units. Usually it's smaller groups, 3 to 5 at a time. So it also cheats the population limit a little bit, and has some
similar
elements.
to Dawn of War.
Yeah, and it has some elements reminiscent of more turn-based games. Like, it is in real time, but you have a resource cap, and you have
that's most RTS.
I mean, yeah, most games do have a cap in some sense, but Rise of Nations has a cap on how many resources you can get at one point. So
that's also
you have
most RTS.
But the limit isn't necessarily defined by how many people you have gathering. It's defined by your tech level. And you have a limited amount of people on each spot as well. Anyway, it kind of, your resources come more as a trickle rather than people grabbing and giving you those resources, like in Age of Empires or Warcraft.
Yeah, like all you're saying so far is making me think of like the night elves in Warcraft 3.
Kinda like that, but the resources they don't deplete. They stay on the map like resources in a Civilization game, except it's in real time rather than turn-based.
So
Like you
more
have-
of a specific amount of control points to gain control of.
You can actually theoretically put your base wherever you want, but you need to have it a city near some resources to gather those resources. Anyway, it's complicated and it basically amounts to it plays somewhere in between Age of Empires and Civilization, more or less. And
You say so?
It's kind of reflected in the soundtrack and the general aesthetic of the game. It's sort of inspired by Empire Earth, and there you go from the Stone Age all the way to the near future, all that sort of stuff. And the soundtrack kinda has to tell the story of civilizations throughout the ages, including talking about them at points in time where they didn't exist. Those societies didn't exist.
Well, not in this form, anyway.
Yeah, not in a recognizable form, at least. And the first track,
the kind of things, the humankind, which is another 4X game, not a real-time strategy game, but it circles around it by essentially having you change the name and properties of your civilization at each new era. So, like, you start with
very interesting, that game.
Yeah, so like you start with the Nubians, and then once you get out of the classic age, suddenly you are the Franks.
Yeah, that is definitely a game that is on my watch list.
Yeah, it's interesting. It lets
check
you
that one out.
Have some freedom in writing your civilization story. It's also not Rise of Nation.
Sorry, that got at the end. What did you say?
I was saying that it wasn't the game we were talking about, to give it back to you.
Yeah, we kind of have a good time going off topic, don't we? In any case, the first track I want to bring up is one of the few tracks. There's a number of them that kind of seem to take a specific nation and try to talk about their entire history in a 5-minute or less track. And sorry, Biker did it again. And this one is a track called The Russian, which, as you might imagine, is
for the German faction.
Of course, Germans.
Got it. Wow.
Yeah. I find this track really neat as it starts with very folky Russian sounds. I mean, the composer, as far as I can tell, is American, so I don't know how sincere to the folk traditions of Russia he is, but he uses some folk instruments at the start, and then it goes into an orchestral
there was some.
bit.
Basically, the strings felt more like a balalaika than anything else to me.
Yeah, I don't know if they are the actual instruments or just some sort of facsimile. I think they are.
The sonorities are close enough that it's clearly, at the very least, an intention of balalaika. Yeah, incidentally, intention of balalaika, my favorite Ben & Jerry's ice cream flavor.
God, Galen's gonna kill us when he edits this. But yeah, the piece moves between the folkier bits and some orchestral bits. Basically, two orchestral moments in this piece. The first, at least to me, maybe I'm biased because I know sort of the broad strokes of Russian history. The first bit kind of plays to me more like as if it's talking about the rise of the Tsars and the Russian Empire and that sort of stuff. While the second bit with more brass kind of feels to me a bit more intimidating, if it's talking about the USSR. So I think it's remarkable how well it invokes Russian history to me when I'm listening to this track.
Now, I have to admit, part of the descriptors you used kind of caught my attention a little, because you mentioned that the intimidating part seems to intimate Soviet rising. But if it's their theme, I don't think it would correspond to intimidating, ominous sounds to them. Like, the boss doesn't hear the boss music constantly. It's only in the struggle with a foe that it rises up. So do you think it's a matter of ethnocentrism? Or is it more that...
I think it's more thematic. I think it's more that tries to showcase the militarization of the USSR versus the, the lack of tanks beforehand, the lack of huge machines of war. I might be wrong though. It's just my interpretation. Maybe I am reading too much of an intimidating sound here because of my preconceived ideas, and maybe the composer did also have some preconceived ideas and added them to the track. But either way, I think it does a good job at basically telling a story of a nation in a song without lyrics. It certainly captures the identity of the nation, even if I can't tell with 100% certainty whether that identity is being true to form. I don't know if those folky beats are how Russians would play those instruments, but to me, from a Western country, it's close enough. It feels Russian to me. It feels like it really grabs that faction's identity and really sets it in stone almost.
Хорошо.
And in fact, you also wanted to bring up a track that really showcases the identity of the faction in question.
Indeed. So, I'm going to start a thread, a train of thought that I'm going to return back to every now and then. And it starts with one of the first RTS I played, which is none other than Warcraft 2. Which was also when Blizzard peaked musically, don't at me. And in it, what happens is that they focus still on the main conflict between the orcs and the humans. It doesn't have literally orcs versus humans in the title because that was the title of the first game, but it's still very much a story of orcs versus humans. And this one is a track on the human faction because the music tracks were segregated, so that essentially if you played human you had an OST, if you played orc you had a different OST. And I think that it really helps drive each of the factions' identity. The orc tracks have more of a lots of drums, kind of feel very warlike. They're both very warlike. It's a story of war, but one has a lot of drums going boom, 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 while the other, the human faction, tries to do something that they're still struggling with to this day, I think, which is to not sound too much like just the default faction or the basic faction, even though there are humans, which is also what we have. Although I haven't seen a picture of you that live, that so I'm not saying you are dog, but on the internet nobody knows if you are dog.
I swear I am not a robot.
I wasn't talking about robots. Why are you?
Because I'm not a robot.
Yeah, anyway.
Back to Warcraft. I think something interesting with the soundtrack is that to this day, every time Blizzard wants to showcase the Horde and the Alliance, they kind of go back to the themes from Warcraft 2. The Horde has a lot of
themes.
The Horde has a lot of drums to this day. Every time, drums and grunts, and the Alliance has a lot of horns, and I mean a lot of horns.
Well, drums are so emblematic of part of the texture of the orc side of things that one of the units in Warcraft 3, the Color Rider, was a drummer on a beast. It wouldn't be a trumpeter, because trumpets are a human thing in this kind of situation, in the context of this game. Humans go with big old horns going because they like their glory way too much, and they're all filthy glory seekers that are thirsty for all of that sweet righteousness.
Every time I think of horns in Warcraft, ever since I've played the Battle for Azeroth expansion to WoW.
My sympathies.
I know we've dropped the game way earlier, so you won't know what I'm talking about. But
no, not way earlier. That was Warlords of Azeroth, so that was just the expansion before. And 2 expansions before. Basically, there was Warlords of Azeroth, Legion, Battle for Azeroth.
Warlords of Draenor, you're thinking of.
Yes.
Yeah, Battle for Azeroth, it kind of became a running gag among fans because one of the new zones to explore was for the Alliance, essentially, Patriots, which hadn't been seen since Warcraft 2, incidentally. Rather, part of it was in Warcraft 3, but mostly its identity was in Warcraft 2. But most of the island was zones where both factions could have some quests, but smack in the middle of the island was a huge city, and the theme of that city had huge, loud horns right at the start of the track. And often you would quest around the city, but you would end up entering the zone that is marked as being part of the city. So it would be like, oh, this ambient track. I am in an area with green fields. Things are peaceful. Things are lovely. And blah, horns. Everyone hated that transition. It was horrendous, but nothing showcases the Alliance better than blaring horns at your face all the time.
What we mean to say is that humans are horny.
Your words, not mine. And I think Galen is cutting that.
If Galen cuts that, he's a coward. Anyway.
Shots fired.
And that's why you watch live. So, all jesting aside. Basically, it's part of what made the human identity at the time and the Alliance identity eventually. But there were still allied people like the dwarves, I think, in the humans, and the high elves were part of this human faction. And they're all like, we're going to do the good guy things by doing good guy murder things. Porn. Am I right? And that's, I mean, when you play them, you have these feelings. It's like you have the aesthetics that is very much centered on stones versus woods and bones. You have all of these elements that help cement the identity of the faction you're playing so that even if you are eyes closed, even if you're just watching a screenshot, no matter what you're doing, you know where you are on this side of that conflict. Because the conflict, even to this day in World of Warcraft, is still an integral part of what drives the game.
Even if I kinda hate that it's part of WoW to this day.
Very much so. But that's a question that could go way too deep, so I'm going to completely put it aside and ask you to talk about the fantasy country of Brazil.
So yeah, Brazil. We're going back to Rise of Nations now. Another of those tracks because I just love the soundtrack.
Yes, I've noticed that.
I hope you didn't see my comment on one of those videos I sent you. I was the top comment on the composer's page.
Please, I have self-respect. I don't watch YouTube comments.
Good. Anyway, it's Rise of Nations theme for Brazil, even though Brazil isn't a playable faction in that game. But it is a playable area, I suppose you could say.
So basically, you can play other nations fighting on Brazilian grounds.
Pretty much, you can play as the colonizers.
Okay.
Let's just let that sink in a little bit. So anyway.
It's sunken, baby. It's sunken all the way.
I'm talking to an European. This isn't gonna end well. The track is... It's weird, I would say. My feelings about this one are a bit weird. It's a nice track. I like the sounds.
Thank you. Next.
The good thing about it, one of the big good things about it is that it doesn't just focus on the samba and bossa nova like a lot of people would if they were to write a song about Brazil.
Yeah.
Which most people just do something bossa nova like and call it a day. This one goes more for the indigenous peoples, mostly I'd say they're trying to bring up the aesthetics of the Tupi tribe, Tupi Guarani tribe.
Yeah, in general, when I listened to this track, I didn't get the whole samba marimba kind of sounds. It didn't sound like the common perception of Brazil so much as a track that plays in the Amazon forest.
Pretty much for most of it. There's that little bit with the orchestra that I guess is supposed to represent the Portuguese showing up or something. Again, this is one of those tracks from the soundtrack that seem to want to tell the story of the country, like the Russian before and a few other tracks. I kind of have one gripe with this one though. Focuses so much on the indigenous peoples and the Amazon, the forest, which is warranted. Those were the main peoples who were in Brazil before the Portuguese came. But then I saw comments of people saying, "Oh, it's a mysterious soundtrack for a mysterious nation in the jungle and whatnot." And I'm like, as a Brazilian, that's not how we would describe ourselves. Not mysterious peoples of the jungle, and I don't think the natives would say that either about themselves. They just happen to live in the jungle. So yeah, that's a bit awkward. I don't know what you thought of it.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you over the sound of my freshly baked baguette.
Yeah. Damn Europeans.
I win again.
Battle of stereotypes. What was your impression of the track? Because I saw a lot of people that I assumed to be Americans talking about, the exotic culture from deep in the jungle and whatnot. That I want to know what your opinion was.
Well, I didn't get that much of an exoticism, but very much a sense of adventure. Part of the unknown because of the woodsy types of sounds, but as I said, evoke the Amazonian forest.
I suppose that's fair enough. I think the game would have been much more awkward if this track was the theme track to a playable Brazilian civilization.
Yes, because then we'd miss on the whole aspect of progression and industrialization that tracks like the Russian track have.
And tracks like the next one has, actually. The next one I want to bring up is from the expansion pack, Thrones and Patriots. The song is called Rockets. If I recall correctly,
the expansion pack of the very same game.
Yes, the expansion pack to Rise of Nations. And if I recall correctly, this track tends to play as soon as you either enter into the Age of Discovery or when you either enter into the Industrial Age or maybe it's the Modern Age, something like that.
Given the name, I'm leaning towards modern.
I'm a bit divisive because based on the name Rockets, you would think modern, but the feeling I get is more Industrial Age because it kind of gives me a feeling of industry rising with the horns and the general progression of the track. Kind of the picture I get tends to be of a city sprawl increasing in size, and then the militarization coming with it once the drums kick in. So I suppose it could be either way.
Yeah, I'm going to have to disagree on you because, as far as I'm concerned, the sounds of industrialization, which I've extensively looked into for making a soundtrack to Satisfactory, way more based on either imitation of factory sounds, like maybe some percussions with a bit of a brass-like feeling, like some sorts of bells on the like going cling, cling, cling. That's for me, along with maybe even some outright theme song, helping to go for adding some rhythm to it. That, to me, are the sounds of industrial era, while this is more of an aspiration to a new age of enlightenment that would fit better a modern era without taking from the actual existing style of this era, like jazz and foxtrot and whatnot, which could also be another angle.
Loud today. I think that's actually part of what I feel from this. It's not that it's the industry itself, but it's the process of a society being industrialized and
but as far as I'm concerned, maybe that's just a change in emotion and feels at this point, because you say to me the feeling of a society being industrialized, and I'm not picturing happy things. I'm picturing thousands of factory workers being parked in unsafe conditions and worked to the bone for the sake of their bosses, which admittedly could also be the modern era. But I'm not really getting this march towards glory that this track reflects. This aspiration to go higher, eventually reaching outer space. Rockets, you know?
I mean, to be fair, I am not very positive about industrialization process either. I think the entire thing was a mess and screwed up way too many people. But
yeah, you screwed up people from the 1870s. Get called out.
We keep screwing things up. But it's more that it kind of evokes to me the image of, those huge metal chimneys showing up as if they are sprouting from the ground or something. That's basically what I get. I think it's helped by the fact that when you play the game, at least for me rather, this track tends to play exactly at the point where I enter a new age in the game. So I kind of imagine the city growing because the city does change aesthetics as you change ages, evolve through the ages. So maybe it's just that when you enter the industrial age in the game, it looks quote unquote glorious because it is a game.
I get what you mean on this point. I get what you mean. You are, after all, in charge.
You aren't the people being screwed over by industrialization. You are the one screwing them, basically. But on to happier topics?
No, definitely not. If that's a transition to the next track, then no, it's a horrible intergalactic war.
Yeah, things won't be happy for a bit, folks. Take it away.
But it's okay because it's mostly robots, and the story isn't really focused on the feelings or the conditions or whatever. It's more about the brutal battles, which incidentally is the name of this track. From Total Annihilation, first fully three-dimensional RTS, an innovator in many aspects, and as far as the music goes, one of the things it brought up is that the most well-known real-time strategy games at the time, Warcraft and Warcraft / Starcraft and Command & Conquer / Red Alert, both had some excellent soundtracks, of course. But one of the way Total Annihilation innovated in that department is by having soundtracks split differently. There is no separate music between the ARM and the core, which are the two factions. And in this way, the identities kind of blend a little more. Like, sure, one is more artificial intelligence centric than the other, but ultimately they both fight with tanks and giant robots and the likes. However, it has ambient tracks, and it only really kicks up when you are actually in conflict. So like you have a calm music, because in real-time strategy games there is a fair amount of downtime as well, where you're just creating your unit, expanding your base, and it can be a bit jarring while you're doing this kind of maintenance to suddenly have something like No Mercy from Command & Conquer that tries up and that goes da 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 da, and all you're doing is placing a power plant, you know? You don't have that risk here, because if no action is going on, you're just moving around with your commander, making units and the likes, you're going to have very ambient tracks from a little known guy that never got recognized for his work establishing an ambience named Jeremy Soule.
Never heard of him.
But when the conflict kicks in, when your tanks are actually firing, when your giant robots are actually shooting like crazy, then it goes into one of the battle tracks, this being one of them, and it starts immediately with the and it keeps that energy all the way. Because it needs to. As long as it's playing, there's action going on. Even if it's an extended bombing session or the likes, there's something that the track accompanies by design, by the way the track is integrated in the game, which means they can afford to go for something more direct, more bombastic, more intense.
Something that interested me quite a bit with this track in particular, Brutal Battle.
Yes.
I was basically comparing it in my head to other works by Soule that I'm familiar with, which is mainly Legend of Evermore on the SNES. It was his first
Secret of Evermore.
His first game. Secret of Evermore, right. And his most recent work in most Elder Scrolls games. And I was trying to figure basically what made this track different from his work on those franchises that I'm familiar with, because it has a very different feel to it. And I think it's not the genre, despite this being very different from RPGs, obviously. But this sort of huge battle you could have in those games as well as a boss theme.
Well, to a degree, yes.
But I think it's the setting that really drives the sound here.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot of horns and brass, and the sound of brass, since we're familiar with those instruments, at least to me, it instantly brings to mind the image of metal in general, which fits very well with the game that's mostly robot.
So well that in fact the missions that metal is one of the two main resources in the game, and eventually through the campaign you go through a set of contested star sectors, eventually ending in the core sector from the enemy faction. So if you play in core, you're eventually attacking the large planets of ARM, and when you play as ARM, you're eventually attacking the main planets of core, which are entirely made of metal, which means you can place metal extractors, which is one of those, anywhere on the map instead of on specific nodes, which is pretty overpowered.
That does sound very overpowered. And I think it would be very, very weird, let's say, if we were to play those sections and the soundtrack was more string instruments and violins and cellos, which you can still make combat music with them, but it would be very weird in that setting, to me at least.
Well, there's another track that's mostly strings at the start, but then the drums happen as well and make a complete ensemble that's meant to evoke really a space opera feel, because it's on that scale as well. So it goes, future and space opera in its tone, which is a distinct kind of sound. But I won't delve too much in the details because we will eventually do a space episode.
Space!
But this track would fit, even if you're mostly fighting on planet. Now then, shall we talk about our Rise of Nation games for a change?
Yeah, we haven't talked enough about that franchise, and I might be a fan. Well, anyway, The next game then is it's called, technically the full title is Rise of Nations colon Rise of Legends. It was meant as a spin-off game, but it has the same composer. So we're talking about Duane Decker again.
As a small aside, if it weren't for the original Rise of Nations title, Rise of Legends in isolation is at least top 10 on the most generic possible video game names ever.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It would fit an MMO, it would fit an RPG.
Oh, yeah. It would fit so many gacha games.
Oh boy, so many.
And then they can have also Legend of the Rising and Legend Colon Rising.
Oh Lord. Lord. Yeah,
Don't get at least a good game managed to snatch this. It is a good game, right?
I think it's a good game, but I don't think the general public seems to think, because contrary to every other Microsoft RTS, this one hasn't received a re-release. So who knows?
Give it time.
It's a very strange game, I'd say. It's another of those asymmetric RTSs like StarCraft, like Warcraft 3, where the factions are very different. While Rise of Nations had a lot of factions for a lot of nations, this one has exactly 3 factions.
Mm-hmm.
The tracks we're talking about are about one of them, but let me introduce the other factions first to get an idea for the world of the game.
Little sin.
So, the main faction, which is quote unquote the humans, even though everyone is human, is the Vinci, which are a faction of heavily industrialized people who deal with clockwork robots and technology inspired by those drawings of tanks and helicopters that Leonardo da Vinci did, hence the name
What's the
Vinci.
name?
There's a faction of essentially brainwashed people. It's kind of uncomfortable because it's aesthetically like the Aztec Empire, except less colorful, and the name is Kuat, so even more Aztec, which is basically aliens fell to the ground. Their tech looks like magic, and they became worshipped as gods. So a bit awkward that the Native Americans get this faction, but anyway. And then there's the third faction, which we will talk about, which is called the Sawu, which is essentially what if the 1000 Arabian Nights were all aspects of a single society, and that society was a playable faction in an RTS. So you have mostly humans, but you also have genies and weird magic, and they're basically the one faction with actual magic in the game.
Magic you are unfamiliar with as a South American.
Yeah, fair enough. At least in the game, I think they're a bit more out there compared to the Arabian Nights. I can't speak. But yeah, it's
hey, some of these tales can get wild.
Yeah, they can. Mythologies in general can get very weird. But yeah, the faction is very Arabic in their aesthetic, though you wouldn't necessarily notice it from the soundtrack, I don't think.
You definitely notice it from the soundtrack. Like the start when it goes, it's very much, hello, you are in a desert level. Would you like some directions? It was either that or some oud.
I suppose, though, I personally don't usually think of the clarinet as an instrument for the desert, but it fits well enough.
It's more desert mystery.
Fair enough. But the main point, main reason I decided to bring the game up is
Because you're late.
the game.
And the second best reason, because?
Yeah, the first one is I really like the soundtrack. But yeah, it works really well with leitmotifs for its civilizations. There's some generic tracks as well in the soundtrack, but in general, it revolves around the three factions, and each of them has, I think 3 or 4 tracks that play during actual gameplay, and a couple of them are also playing the results screen at the end of play. And each track,
we're doing with music that mainly, but not exclusively, helps cement the identities of the different factions you play.
pretty much. I think you can get music from the other factions on occasion, but it's been ages since I last played the game. I'm not entirely sure, but it mostly sticks to your faction's soundtrack and to some generic songs. Most of those generic pieces were actually inspired by a previous track used in Rise of Nations that the producers enjoyed a lot. But anyway, the faction specific tracks usually come in 3 main flavors, which are everything is fine and you're just building up, which in the game files the tracks don't have final names. We only go by the names they have in the game files. So those ambient ones are called the economic tracks, as in you're dealing with the economy of the faction.
Yeah, you're doing macros essentially.
Yeah, there's also the winning tracks, which are when you're in combat and are winning, and they also play in the results screen if you won the game.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the losing tracks, which I don't know when they play. I have no idea.
Maybe when they play. Nah, that wouldn't make any sense.
Yeah, they play when you're losing. Essentially, if you lost a city or you're starting to lose a district of a city, the sad, ominous tracks start to kick in on the results screen if you lost the match. But the cool thing I have is I have to talk about is the use of motives in the soundtrack. I've shared 2 soundtracks from the Sawu faction, which are on the episodes playlist. And both of them have the same intro, but in different instruments and maybe in different scales. I'm not sure. I'm not that deep into music theory, but I know the losing track uses a minor scale, so it's mostly minor chord.
That things are dire.
Yeah, and it actually goes lower in the spectrum. Let's say it uses lower, more bass heavy sounds. But I love the amount of things you can do with the same note, essentially, but changing the instrumentation or maybe tweaking the tempo just a little bit, because both of those tracks, despite starting with the exact same notes, I think one of them really feels much more relaxing, while the other very much is that bombastic you are winning with a lot of brass again. I think brass is the theme of the day here. So it goes from the soft clarinet going, oh, you're in the desert, you're exploring and building up and dealing with, building your city and that sort of stuff. And then you're in battle and winning, and it goes through the bombastic trumpets and brass section going, yes, you're a hero, basically. You're winning the war and whatnot. The same notes, just a variation on it. on them.
That reminds me, now a little here behind the curtain. We had originally a plan to do a tactical RPG episode with Galen there, and one of the games and the tracks I wanted to talk about has a similar feel because so it's in Fire Emblem Awakening, and the idea is that when you're commanding your units from top down, the track has a pretty calm, involved but exploratory feeling, and when you actually get in the battle cutscene, you're getting the tracks blend together essentially, and this one goes into something that's obviously very similar but way more intensified, and I had this mental image of essentially the orchestra playing, having the same notes, but the conductor goes from just guiding very cleanly to going completely yes, go give me that, and making wild flying motions or whatever conductors do. And according to what you're saying, it's a similar situation there.
That's what I get from it, at least. I think the composition does change a little bit, but at least the civilizations, the factions motif at the start, it doesn't change all that much. At least with these two tracks, with the losing version, it's different. It's much more bass heavy and obviously much darker in tone. So probably the composition swapped a little bit and moved to a minor scale or something like that. But that's basically the mantra for all three factions. All three of them have that dynamic
the formula.
Yeah, the Sawu are just basically the one where I like it the most. I think the differences are more obvious. The Kuotl in particular they're kind of ominous in all three versions because they are the evil guys in the main story, so they are always ominous. Just you are winning, so it's less ominous. You are losing. Now things are very, very, very base heavy. And the Sawu, they kind of have both good and evil guys. In the gameplay itself, you have the Jin as a character, and it's basically evil in the game. Entire kind, all Jins are kind of at least mischievous, or at worst, they are straight up evil. So you get the most dynamic variations, I'd say, with them. Speaking of something being dynamic, Command and Conquer.
Yeah, that's basically the point of why I brought up this song. Not just because the track itself is very guitar heavy and animated, but because it represents, to a similar degree, in a way, to the tracks you brought up, the culminations of elements of previous tracks. The combination of them. Because you have, on one end, what we've established the RTS soundtrack can represent, which is faction identity. Like in the human track, or like in the fact that Sawu has a leitmotif. And here they picked music genres. So you have different main music themes when you are playing as the Allies or the Soviets or the Empire of the Rising Sun. Because yes, it's Red Alert 3, so they went back in time and eventually led to a hyper-robotized imperialist Japan. And so they have a very futuristic soundtrack with lots of synths and lots of a bit of a Ghost in the Shell vibe on purpose as well. Meanwhile, the Soviets are very much an industrial rock feel to their tracks of that type. As for the Allies, they went with just full-on hard rock. I mean, the track is named Rock and O, which is an obvious play on Shock and O tactics, but with more rock to it, because that's the one of the elements of the identity they imprinted to the Allied faction in the episode. It's not the neutral faction, it's not the default faction again. It has its tone, and it's very, we're going to bring the justice to the entire world whether they want it or not. Oh yeah, now bomb that entire continent.
I mean, the entire thing with that game is sort of that there's no good guys.
No, absolutely.
History changed so everyone's a bunch of pricks and no one is good, but everything's so cheesy. The actors are so cheesy.
It would be crazy if history changed so that there were bad guys in power.
Oh boy.
But yeah.
Please go on with the music. I don't want to cry.
So I said it was a combination because it's not just the matter of the faction being there. It's also that they brought up what was already the case in Total Annihilation, which is the change of music depending on whether or not action is going on. That they have an internal way to track it, which is even integrated in gameplay. Essentially, as the commander, you have occasionally powers that you can use, which are things like a Soviet magnet satellite that can bring up tank to outer space and then make them crash on other enemy units. You can deploy micro drones to set up shields and the likes. And
I love the idea of the space magnet. So over the top, it fits the game so well.
Absolutely. And in this case, the way you charge it is that the more action is happening, the more the gauge charges up, giving you more and more upgrades on these powers. And since they already have a way to track how much action is going on, and whether you are macroing or being actively inside of multiple engagements or defending base harasses and the likes, they also have a way to track it for the music and to go from the more calm tracks, which generally are not faction segregated and instead depend on the map you're on. So in the campaign in particular, if you're playing in Paris, you suddenly have some accordion going on while you're setting up your base at first. Unfortunately, I don't think there's also a mission like in Weatherlight 2 where you could use the Eiffel Tower as a giant Tesla coil, but you do have secret hidden missile base in Mount Rushmore, so that's gonna count for something.
It's been so long. I need to play those games again.
Oh yeah,
so funny.
If you wanna play in co-op, fire it up. Send me a call. I'm game. I have the games.
I need to grab them. Last I played was ages ago.
Yeah. But yeah, basically it blended the ideas and reached this point where you have the terrain and the land you're in expressed by default, and the more the conflict escalates, the more it gets intense and expresses your faction's identity, because in a way the more it becomes about you and the enemy. And you and the enemy throw in tanks at each other repeatedly until one of them gets crushed under the weight of the tanks. Or bombs, or whatever is your preferred methods of armament. Well, it can even be backdoor engineers for all I care.
Completely down to earth.
Exactly. Speaking of things that are very concrete and down to earth, Age of Mythology.
And our segues are on point today.
Right?
So yeah, if anyone listening to this thought we were not going to bring up the Age of Empires franchise, here we are. The entire franchise actually has a bunch of composers. The three main Age of Empires games released thus far actually have they had the original soundtrack remastered once they got the definitive edition versions and a new composer came in. So there's a lot of composers working on this franchise, and they are basically the culmination of the whole the song plays according to what's happening, I'd say, because they all are known for those peaceful tracks, those peaceful ambient tracks. And then when you start attacking a castle or city, things go wild and very.
I will admit I do not remember that, but it's been a while. Honestly, the only track I remember from any Age of whatsoever game is the main menu theme from Age of Empires 2 going da 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 da.
I think that's the main theme for the franchise in general, minus Age of Mythology. Except
which
it's
is
very
more of a side game. A very
yeah,
good one.
yeah. It is included in the game as a joke. You have those taunts in the game where you press a combination of numbers and it says a thing, plays a sound.
Mm-hmm.
And if you type 999, it plays a comedy version of the Age of Empires theme,
Nice.
which is very annoying, very very annoying.
Wololo.
No, it actually the sounds are actually a guy, a very high pitched voice going, "This is RTS 3 because it came after Age of Empires 2, which was the third RTS game in the franchise." That's a fun fact for y'all because you cannot understand what the person is saying in that taunt. It is very weird. But yeah, Age of Mythology in particular, I think is the one where those dynamic tracks are more common. I'm not entirely sure how often they play in the previous games. I don't think they were a part of the first Age of Empires at all, especially since it came out the same year of Total Annihilation.
I will also say regarding the track in particular you've offered, which is named Adult Swim, no relation, is that it does carry in its instrumentation the pinched strings that give immediately a more antique feel, which is fitting, because it's about monsters and heroes in ancient times.
Yeah, pretty much. For the record, the entire soundtrack has weird titles. I think another of the more peaceful times tracks is titled "Eat Your Potatoes," if I recall correctly.
Sorry. You call that weird soundtrack names? I'm sorry, I only listen to Sawano.
I mean, one of the tracks is also called "If You Can Use a Doorknob."
Okay, example of a Sawano soundtrack name. Give me just a moment.
Oh boy.
There we go. How about Z10B2R0I1E2F0I9N1G3? Briefing.
That reminds me of Keygen Church.
Kinda, yeah.
Age of Mythology track titles are more weird for where they're placed. I'd say because it has a title theme that's very glorious. It's kind of trying to invite that feel of you are dealing with the gods, you are dealing with mythical creatures. Yeah. Zeus is in the cover art of the game, and the title track, the track that plays in the main menu, it's called "A Cat Named Mittens."
Yeah,
it's weird, but the main track I think of when I think of the game is Adult Swim, which is the track I brought, and it's the one on our playlist. And if there's anything I can say negative about it, is that it kind of feels like the game does have a main faction, which is the Greeks, as it has a very Greek Mediterranean sound.
Yeah.
And in fact, the first expansion to the game is about more Greeks. It adds a new faction, but rather than the fourth faction being a new folk tale, a new mythology, it's the
Atlantics.
Titans. Yeah, it's Atlanteans and their gods are the Titans.
Yeah.
So more Greek. So it does kind of have a main faction, quote unquote, especially as our hero in the main campaign is a Greek dude.
Yeah, in this situation, correct me if I'm wrong, but the soundtrack is not segregated by faction then.
If I recall correctly, no, it isn't. I think the map plays more of a part than the faction.
I figured as much. Like, if you're playing in a desert map, you're going to hear things that would naturally fit the Egyptian faction, but it's map dependent. But okay. It's probably map dependent to be safe.
Yeah, not entirely map dependent, because you do get some tracks playing in every map. I think Adult Swim is one of the big tracks in my memory because it can play in basically every map after a while, I think. And I think when the match starts, you get a jingle that is faction dependent, but I might be wrong on that. My memory is not the best. But Age of Empires in general has always been pretty good at building the ambience, I'd say, in those games. I haven't played the first Age of Empires, but the second Age of Empires has a very sort of medieval feeling to it. It's very
it goes from the Dark Ages to the Imperial Age. That's part of the gameplay.
Yeah, and the soundtrack feels very fitting to that. Age of Mythology is sort of Bronze Age inspired, but more grand because it involves the gods.
Yeah, there's a fantasy aspect to it.
And Age of Empires 3 has full orchestras and marching band sounds like you'd hear from military groups. You have those small drums that they would carry to battle, flutes and all that stuff. So it's a franchise that has always been pretty good at creating a sense of ambiance and really putting you in the setting that the game takes place in.
While it lasted anyway, and I want to say that because there's of course something that's permeating the topic of RTS in general, namely the fact that they are dead these days. They were some of the biggest games, at least of PC in particular, a while ago, and eventually they very much faded into obscurity. I think we can both agree on those accurate, historical, perfect facts.
I think mostly MOBAs kind of took over as a sort of
It's more
small
than
scale
that.
strategy.
It is more than that. And it started before the MOBAs really took off. There are several culprits that all basically piled up and kill the genre in a lot of ways. And the biggest culprits, I would say, are paradoxically the two main franchises of the genre. Because on one hand, you had Command and Conquer, which evolved up to a point, and then Command and Conquer 4 happened. I don't think I need to say more.
That game does not exist.
On the Blizzard side, I think the genre died because of something else. First is indeed the branch towards the MOBA, but there's also the fact that with Warcraft 3 and StarCraft 2, they gave the impression that the genre was about personal stories and about very story-rich, very diverse campaigns with high production values that not a lot of other studios could ever withstand. I think the closest that managed to do that were Relic with Dawn of War 2, where they basically went from a more classic RTS style in Dawn of War to, well, essentially 4 guys and a few bits of entourage about, and making it more of a top-down RPG dressed as an RTS, in the line of their previous games, Company of Heroes in particular. But basically you have these important derivations to the genre and what made the genre attractive for a lot of people. There's a reason why the factions are one of the most common kind of themes in the genre's music, and that's because in a lot of ways factions are the characters, not the individual generals and heroes of those factions. Even in Age of Mythology, there's not a Hercules theme. They're just a theme for British lands, because it's on that scale and not zoomed in on heroes the way a Warcraft 3 or a StarCraft 2 was.
I think there's another level to things that kill the genre. You say the two big franchises, basically Warcraft and Command and Conquer, but Age of Empires was huge as well in the early 2000s. Age of Empires 2
then Age of Empires 3 came out and everybody hated it.
Yeah, Age of Empires 3, honestly, replaying it on the definitive edition, it's not that bad, but it had a big issue.
Yeah, because there isn't Windows games or Windows Live on it anymore, I think.
Oh, there's that, but there's more than that. Age of Empires 3 had a couple issues. To begin with, it was meant to be another spin-off like Age of Mythology. Hence the maps being smaller, there's more focus on the combat rather than the economy compared to Age of Empires 2 and Age of Mythology. So it was forced to be treated as the spiritual successor to Age of Empires 2 when that wasn't the intention. But beyond that, the gameplay on the original release had you essentially grinding matches to level up your home city and unlock cards.
There was
to send shipments.
Yeah, they made an RTS grindy by design.
Yeah, the definitive edition has all cards unlocked from the start, so you don't have to grind and all that. So they knew what was wrong there and fixed it. But
because there's another aspect that is noteworthy, and it's this time almost solely on Blizzard, which is the heavy competitive aspect of the genre. Every RTS is, well, most of the RTS, to be safe, are made with competition in mind at some level. But only StarCraft, in particular, Warcraft to a lesser degree, reached the competitive heights that basically invented the notion of esports in Korea. And as a result...
Age of Empires 2, ever since it came back, it's kind of getting there.
Yeah, but it came back after these two notions were created. And they're still there, but they're not integral to the appeal of the genre to the broad public. A lot of people bought an RTS, played the solo campaign, thought they were god at the game even though they were terrible because they were playing on easy, and they were happy with that. And I think a lot of the genre's perception shifted in ways that made it less sustainable, which is how you get titles that have tons of quality. From Tooth and Tail's competitive focus, with crazy animals and streamlined gameplay, where you directly lead in the troops guiding a singular avatar, to things like the most recent Iron Harvest. They have a lot of good elements of elements that the great art games of the genre had, but they don't really have some of the core gameplay of building up a base and trying to swindle your opponent if you have one to go in no rush for 15 minutes or whatever. On teching and expanding in a very map-dependent way, and maybe playing a map where both sides are on balance, and then deciding, you know what, I'm going to look at the campaign. Not because of the deep personal story of that one hero unit that's going to be on half the map, but because of the progression of the faction, represented by some characters in some cutscenes maybe, but overall at a grander scale. And yeah, there's a lot that got lost in translation, I think, over the years, and as the people that were mostly gameplay-centric had an out in MOBAs, which were literally created in an RTS map editor, we eventually kind of lost the genre, except on a historical level. And that sounds grim the way I put it this way, but I do have some hopes, in particular in the fact that there's an Age of Empires 4 coming up.
I think, to me in particular, a big point that may have helped in RTSs dying for quite a while is that RTSs are sort of meant to be easy to get into a game. It's hard for the game to end. Sometimes it can last forever, but you can drop in, and just by looking at the map, you can get an idea of how things work.
Exactly.
In Warcraft,
build your buildings, icons are flashing up, build more stuff. There you go.
Yeah, and for example, Warcraft 1 and 2, both factions played the exact same, and each unit was very unique. So you could tell this one was a caster, this one was...
well, not the exact same, but there were some differences. But yes, each factions had siege weaponries and fast units that evolved into casters and the like. They were similar, but not exactly the
same. In Age of Empires, I think another thing also is that, first of all, the factions were real world factions. So you kind of join in with the expectations based on knowing the history of that faction. For example, the Spanish had a lot of colonies in the Americas. So you kind of imagine, okay, they are going to be about gold, about trade, and about ship. That's exactly what they are.
Turkish faction had a lot of focus on gunpowder heavy units, and they adjusted that by having one unique unit per faction, but then deactivating some units for some.
Yeah, and StarCraft also dealt with that problem of having things that are easily recognizable, despite having original factions, by having them having very different and striking designs that kind of instantly tell you this faction is the guys with the guns. You attack from afar. This one is you are going to swarm because your units are very little, and this one is your units are bulky but expensive, so use them wisely.
That's the base. And on a competitive level, that completely falls into the water and things get very confusing and very specific. And if they're very confusing and very specific, they're not as marketable as what you just said.
And I think over time, devs, I don't know if they didn't know how to deal with new technology or if they just kind of got lost in design or if it was executive decisions. But some of the later RTSs that led to the death, quote unquote, of the genre, they kind of weren't as recognizable. I'd say the things the factions were good at weren't as easy to understand. Units in Age of Empires 3, for example, they look a lot similar to one another. Like there's a lot of guys with rifles. There's a lot of guys with pistols. So it's hard to discern. Warcraft 3, while it didn't...
Sure, you can discern to a degree, but not to the point where you can tell this is the cavalry, this is the archers, these are the footmen.
Even if you can, at least in, let's say, Age of Empires 2, you have the archer that attacks, I believe, cavalry, and the archer that attacks other archers. And you can tell them apart more or less. Sorry. You can tell them apart more or less because the one that attacks cavalry has the more powerful weapon, which is the crossbow. The one that attacks archers is attacking guys with very little armor and has to defend from afar. So it has a spear and a shield. The shield blocks arrows. So there is a visual element that helps you at least distinguish a little bit.
Same with future games. In StarCraft 2 in particular, if you want to fight off a swarm of Zerglings, maybe the guy with the flamethrower is the way to go. Turns out, yes.
Pretty much. But then you have like Command & Conquer 4. I think it's not that easy to distinguish them.
Command & Conquer 4 is not an RTS almost. It's an always online experience that's now dead and that tried to go half MOBA, half persistent game and bastardized everything, and I hate it with a passion, and I have a personal grudge for people that let it devolve the way it did.
I couldn't tell. But yeah, Age of Empires 3 is the other big one where that lack of distinguishing factors exists.
Also, honestly, 1700s warfare, like, kinda boring. Maybe just me, but even with things like Total War, Napoleon and Empire Total War never caught my interest. Rome, Shogun, yeah, let's go. Empire, Napoleon.
I wouldn't say it doesn't catch my interest, but I do see myself when I play, I only play against the AI, Age of Empires 3. I don't play it in PvP. But every time I play, I end up just having a huge army of musketeers and absolutely no other military unit. And it's not because they are overpowered. There is a very well crafted balance in that game, as with the other Age of Empires games. But that's kind of the aesthetic of the age. When you think of battles around that time, you think of things like the American Revolution, and you think of guys with red or blue coats with muskets. So there's a lack of variation in there as well.
Exactly.
And I think things might improve. StarCraft 2 already was a start, but not many studios followed suit.
Yeah, the problem with StarCraft 2 wasn't that it was a bad game, it was an excellent game and an excellent RTS. But not everyone can make a StarCraft 2, especially if you take the campaign into account. And especially if you take into account that each campaign is its own full-price game at release.
Yeah, it was so big they had to release it as 3 games essentially, and not every studio can do that.
It was going to make them so much money they could release it at 3 games more like. But that's another topic.
That too.
The point of all of this is that it's not a grim point about how this or that made mistakes. It sounds a lot like this at times, but the main point is a message of hope regarding what I've seen so far of Age of Empires 4 that's releasing later this year, because it's a well-known franchise that's returning to something that people have known and enjoyed in the past, essentially the same era as Age of Empires 2, but with more distinct factions. They're scaling down the number of factions a little to make them more distinct. They're focusing on the story of the different nations and camps rather than on individual people. And I think that can work very well.
I think it fascinates me that they're basically taking pretty much the exact same setting as Age of Empires 2, but they're using modern technology to do things that they actually kind of wanted to do for Age of Empires 2, but couldn't.
Yeah, exactly. And they can afford to retread that ground because we haven't really had any impactful RTS since StarCraft 2.
That and Age of Empires 2 has gotten a huge competitive scene in the last 3 or so years. If I recall correctly,
that's a remake.
Kinda not. It was
and besides,
going on
I'm
even
not
with
talking about the competitive scene. I'm talking about broader people.
Sure. I do think that the part of the appeal, of course, the gameplay was a bit dated, but there was the whole YouTube aspect.
The gameplay wasn't dated. The gameplay was the original game because that's what it was, and it's fine. That's the point. Building bases, making units, and sending them the way of the opponent never really got old. The game veered away in other ways, that's all.
My point isn't that. It's that while Age of Empires 2, it's specific mechanics, like farm reseeding, for example. Your farms would die and you had to reseed them by paying a bit of wood. That is a bit outdated to us now. So, of course, they did fix it on the Definitive Edition, but even before the Definitive Edition, there was a lot of attention already going to Age of Empires 2 again. Part of it was nostalgia, I think.
Part of it was that there wasn't any game in the genre.
There's that. There's the nostalgia because people who originally played it as kids are now people in their 30s and 40s. who finally have extra income that they can spend on gaming. So they are interested in these things. Part of it is the memes, honestly. A meme video by a caster called T90 got
Never heard of
he got over 1 million views by casting a match in a joke map. So that kind of helped the game come back as well, which then led to the HD version and now the definitive edition and Age of Empires 4 as well.
I'm not sure of that timeline.
I think the video came after the HD version, but before the definitive edition. But in any case, it helped improve the perception, I would say.
I think there's going to be a lot of that conversation that is going to get cut.
Pretty
because
much.
Like right now we are past 1:30, so maybe we should wrap it back up to music and then wrap up the episode.
Fair enough.
So let me think of a good way to return to the music.
By
taking the save point of Age of Empires 4, maybe?
I have an idea.
Okay.
But yeah, with Age of Empires 4 coming up and other games by other studios, lots of RTS developers broke off from Blizzard and opened their own studios. Hopefully we will have a return to these great soundtrack traditions. I'm sure we can expect at least the great ambient and civilization-based tracks from Age of Empires to show up in Age of Empires 4. Hopefully the other smaller studios can do something similar as well.
Also, Klepacki is still working. He even composed for an RTS, 8-bit Armies.
There you go. So hopefully
didn't take off. So that's why it didn't take off, though. So that's kind of why we want some of the games in this genre back as well, because they offer a unique texture of music that can be dynamic and that can express the consciousness and the identity of a whole lot of people and not an individual person or an individual place. And I think that's something that I've been missing a lot from my soundtrack environment.
And I think they also represent really well player interaction, especially the ones with more dynamic soundtracks that vary according to what you're doing. It really...
Yes, I would call shooting a tank shell across somebody's base an interaction.
Yes, but they really showcase the player's ability to change things, even if
by destroying
it's
them.
Just changing the song. Yes, by just... Why do you need to undermine my point? Anyway. Hopefully we'll see something cool in the horizon, and Age of Empires 4 is coming up in October, if I recall correctly, so
yes,
not too far away.
Unless it's delayed.
Don't say that. Fingers crossed. So we'll be leaving on a hopeful note for the near future. That's it for today, folks. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully Galen will be able to edit this. Sorry, Galen. Anyone interested in the tracks we've talked about, most of them can be found in the playlist linked in the episode description, and you can talk to us, send your feedback, or say that we are very, very wrong by emailing us at music.arcade.podcast@gmail.com. And we'll see you next time, hopefully with our producer along.
See ya.